You all pray with me. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. From what I've read, the pool there at Bethesda is a real place and probably was a place where people went to try to be healed of their various infirmities. There are frescoes on the wall there with the pictures of the pool, and actually the fresco depicts angels coming down and stirring the waters. So archaeologists have been to this place. It was a real place of long ago where people sought healing. I know a place that's similar to that in much more recent history. It's that place where I used to work once upon a time called Goldwater Hospital. Goldwater Hospital in New York City was a New York City-owned hospital. It had 1,000 beds. It was for people who'd had really bad things happen to their bodies, for long-term care of the chronically ill, for rehab of the severely physically disabled. And all the people who were at Goldwater Hospital, if they'd had any other resources, they would have gone someplace else. This was a hospital for people who had nothing. So this is all financed by Medicaid. There is no private insurance here. These are people who've probably burned every social bridge of their life. There's not much left in the way of family connections, social connections, work to rehabilitate people too. Maybe you get the picture. This is pretty much at the bottom of our society. And interestingly enough, where does our world put people that the world sort of doesn't want to know about? We put them on islands. Did you know that's a truth all around the planet? You will find prisons and hospitals for the insane and the ill. And for hundreds of years, we have taken the people we'd rather not acknowledge and stuck them on an island. So in the middle of the East River in New York City is this hospital where I spent 20 years. When you walk in the front door of the hospital, you are immediately confronted by people. Most of these folks are not necessarily bedbound. So they're up in their wheelchairs of all various sorts, sizes, shapes, and kinds that wheelchairs could possibly come in. Some people even on rolling stretchers, which you can lie on with your stomach if you can't sit in a chair, and you can wheel it this way with your arms lying on your stomach on a rolling stretcher. It's quite a sight. Not for the faint of heart. And there are many folks who would come to Goldwater, even coming to think that they wanted to work there, and they didn't stay very long because they just couldn't take it. It was just plain too depressing. But here's the but. I discovered that there were two kinds of people at Goldwater. There were those who sort of stared at their own belly button and their own misery and were endlessly sad and lost most of their social skills. But then there were people who didn't. There were people who seemed to somehow survive, who somehow were able to make life happen in spite of all the bad things that had happened to them. There was one man. His name was Howard. Kind of like the man in our story today, Howard. I met him when he was probably already about 60 years old. Howard was born with congenital syphilis, which had deformed his body. was born in about 1920, I think. He had spent his entire life unwanted in an institution. But Howard knew God. And Howard had made life happen inside that institution. Howard went around in his wheelchair every day. He visited people. He made other people's lives feel better. Howard got a job delivering the New York Times to employees who would like to have it at their office door in the morning. So every day he went out to out by the edge of out the door of the hospital near the edge of the river where a truck would drive by and drop off a stack of New York Times, and he'd pick them up and put them in his lap. And he'd wheel up and down this hospital. His hospital is more than a half a mile long from end to end. And he'd wheel around that hospital and hand out the New York Times to all of us who would subscribe to it with Howard. And he learned how to run the audio-visual projector where they showed movies on Saturday nights. And so every Saturday night, Howard was down there running that machine. And those of you who remember the old days, this isn't DVD days and easy ways or just stick in the thing, you know. This is back when it comes on a big, long reel and you got to thread it through all of those things. You young people don't know anything about that. Some of you older folks might remember, you know, it was quite a deal to run a big movie projector. It was a major deal. And sometimes the film would break and you have to stop and fix it, make it all happen good. But Howard had learned how to do that. There was one thing Howard had never been able to do, and that was Howard didn't know how to read. So in his early 60s, when I got to know Howard, Howard used to come to my office every morning for about 15 minutes. And Howard learned how to read. Enough so that he could read a few things at the hospital, a few things in that newspaper, and more than anything, he wanted to learn how to sign his name. And Howard, he was just filled with love and the love of God, and didn't let any infirmity ever stop him for how much joy he handed out to other people. And he was always willing to learn a new thing and to do a new thing. He was an amazing man who I had the privilege of knowing. And I was there at the end of his life. And one of the people who helped to make sure that there was a service plan for him at the hospital, since there was nobody on the outside who was ever going to do that for Howard. But Howard simply didn't let life and all of its troubles defeat him. Howard didn't use his congenital disability as an excuse. That's what I hear in the story we read this morning, that first one. 38 years that man has been there, and when Jesus asks him about being healed, he's, oh, but there was nobody to get me in the water first. Nobody to help me. Nobody, like they elbowed me out of the way. I mean, did you hear the excuses? But Jesus says, take up your mat and walk. That's the good news. That it does finally connect with him to take up his mat and walk. We also at the hospital had a group that we ran of people who'd been in that hospital like Howard for a long time. But this group of folks, unlike Howard, had done nothing. Oh, poor me. My life is awful. I can't walk. I can't. Most of these people, I've looked at them and what their situation was and realized, you know what, if they actually put some effort into it, these folks could get out of this place. So we put together a little group of about 10 of these folks who've been, as I call it, staring at your belly button for a long, long time and thinking about, oh, poor me. And we asked them to, in the coming week, to do one thing for somebody else. Just one thing that you did for another person. And we help them figure out, in spite of all those disabilities, they would have some kind of an ability to do one thing. One man who was pretty good in his motorized wheelchair, and he tootled around the hospital feeling sorry for himself. But there were a few bedbound patients who weren't so mobile. So his one thing was to go to one person on his unit and ask them if they'd like a book or a magazine from the library downstairs. And he'd go get it for them. And he did. Somebody else went and got some food for somebody at the canteen when they really, really wanted a little extra something to eat. Somebody else took letters to be mailed. Somebody else helped somebody make a phone call. Somebody who could read and write okay wrote a letter for somebody who couldn't write anymore. So it's back before we had all that internet stuff. But we helped everybody in that group find one thing they could do for somebody else. And then after they'd done that for a couple of weeks, we said, well, you think you could up the ante? Could you do 2 things this week? And then we did 3 things. Well, to make a long story here short, by simply reaching out to other people, those 10 folks figured out over the course of 2 years it took how to get themselves an apartment and the home help that they would need and to leave the institution. Because they started doing for somebody else, which is like the power of God coming on them to heal them. It's like Lydia, who gets blessed here and baptized, and immediately, what does she want to do? She invites them into her home. She becomes a doer and a spreader of the word and the goodness. It's true for all of us. We all make excuses why we don't change, don't we? Oh, it's just too hard. I'm too tired. It costs too much. I don't have time. We all get very stuck. But life is simply waiting for us. God is waiting to heal us from everything that troubles us. Everything. I mean, God is like in the air you breathe. Not someplace special. You don't have to come here on Sunday mornings to get connected to God. I mean, it's nice that you do. I like being with all of you, but. And for me in our stories today, I like the image of water. Did you notice the image of water is in all of these stories? Water is the essence of life. You know, we're more water than anything else. It's in every cell of your being. Without water, life doesn't happen. When all those great scientists are out there, with rovers running around on Mars, they're all digging up the soil, hoping they might find evidence of somehow there was water. Because if there could be water, there could be life. God is like water. That is life. Life is in that water that is already in you. And then I like to swim. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been a fish since I was a little bit bigger than that one over there. I learned to swim really early. And I swam and swam and swam, and I became waterfront directors at summer camps. And, I just lived in the water, and I canoe and I can sail. And man, give me the ocean waves or a lake or a river. Give me the water. I love it. I love it. Always have. And I love just to be in it. I love to stand in the shower. My last congregation used to tease me because I would always tell them about the inspirations from God I had while standing in the shower. There's something about that hot water running down over me that just fills me up with God. But that's what God is like. It's like every minute of every day you are swimming in God. God is in you, in all your cells of your body, and you're swimming in God. Everywhere. To restore you, to heal you, if you want it. But you gotta want it. Like the people in our stories. It's right there. Having a relationship with God and being in the middle of that crystal fountain that is God. It's like the story of the Wizard of Oz. What does Dorothy discover at the end? All she wants to do in that whole story is go where? Go home. And what does she find out at the end? That she's had the power all along. You've always had the power, and you always will, to swim in God and be nourished and healed for all your life. You just have to want it and say yes. Amen. We come to you.